Well, I'm working on a excavator today. Um, I'm James Hughes. As I was working, I was just thinking about uh, the things God has done, and I remember my mother telling a story, um, really telling us about how she grew up as children. They were mostly separated from their parents, or at least their parents together. My granddaddy Adams um was in World War II. Coming home from after the war, my mother remembers him coming down the street. Uh, he didn't serve the Lord, didn't know Jesus. My grandmother, he left them, and my mom um, and her siblings, and of course her mother, and kind of went about his life apart from Jesus, apart from his family. Well, these things went on, and my mother ended up marrying my dad, um, and at some point, I think about the time, I guess it was around 1967, um, my granddaddy Adams come to know Christ, and he turned from his ways. Him and my grandmother served the Lord wholeheartedly. Our family knew about Christ. Often went to church, probably made some professions of faith, did. But in our home, there was no real walking with Jesus. We were uh, a home that had a lot of trouble, as a lot of homes do. But as time went on, I became a believer, um, and my wife and I served the Lord and followed Him. And of course, my siblings also came to Christ, and of course, my mother and dad even. And as time went on, especially my mother, um, really wanted to follow Christ and did. Well, the point of this whole video is things I didn't know. Um, Grandmother and granddaddy were, like I said, they were probably, I think it was right around 1967 when he really began to follow Christ. That might be off a little bit. But they would send us, birthday cards. They were faithful and that sort of thing. Um, and I was married at that time. My wife would save things, which I don't even remember these cards. But when I was about 25, I accepted Christ and really began to follow Jesus. And my wife was digging through um, uh, some of the cards and stuff that she had put back, and she brought it out. And there was one particular card um, that had the scripture on it, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. And of course, that was on the card. But what was really amazing about that was sort of my kind of go-to scripture before I knew that card existed. My sister also shared a story. My sister was a year older than I. Would go and stay with my grandmother, granddaddy, Adams, who lived in a little apartment in Greenville. He was a supervisor on some sort of dock there where they brought in and transported goods and that sort of thing. They attended the church there. They had a little apartment, 2-bedroom apartment, nothing fancy at all. It was nice, but nothing fancy. In their bedroom, there was 2 single beds, one on each side of a lampstand, and they would pray. They would call out our family, and that would be all the siblings of my mother and their siblings, or their children. Call us all out by name, that God would rescue us. And of course, God did. I don't think they saw that. I think they had passed on before all these things really turned around. But I find those things very amazing, that how my granddad, who did not serve Jesus for even until after his children were grown, became a believer and just really give his life to Jesus. And they prayed for the family, and how God honored that prayer. And even though he had not done so well as a dad when his children were small, he certainly made an impact through prayer and example on his whole family. So I'm sure those years he was praying, maybe it looked as though nothing was happening. Maybe they had more faith than I know about. But either way, what they prayed for happened. My granddad died before my grandmother. They were at the funeral, and my mother saw a fellow standing over near, kind of off to the side. She thought it might have been one of my granddad's old friends. So she went over to speak to him. And he told her what happened. My granddad obviously was out doing what he wanted to. He was in bars and that sort of thing before he come to Christ. And he had friends there that he associated with in those places. So when he accepted Jesus, he went to where they were at the bar and told them what had happened to him and shared Christ. But he also told them, he said, "I'll never return." They didn't believe that. They thought he would come back, which he never did. And that was the story of him coming to Christ. Of course, there's many others of people he talked with and shared with, his faith and how God changed his life. The testimony to me is powerful in the sense that I'm sure his children were grown, and he realized when he come to Christ what had happened and how he had failed to be a dad. But how God gave them, almost bought back the time, how he reversed the effects in the sense that he was able to pray for his family. And even though he didn't see that, as best I can remember the dates, and I'll have to check that, his family came to Christ. And as they was in that apartment, on those calling out their family by name, God was faithful. I recorded this, not sure why yet, but I'm certain there's people out there that feels like, hey, I've done so much and it's gone so far, I could never do anything to reverse what I've done. Well, you can't, but our God has a way of taking our situation, even in all its bad, and turning it to be a testimony of what God can do. So my prayer for you is that if you're there, just know that's what God did for my granddad and, of course, my family. God bless.